Hi friends, my name is Sarah, and I'm currently the Intentional Interim Minister with St. Andrew's United Church in Lacombe, Alberta. If you're watching this video, it means that you received the link via the email letter that I sent out to the St. Andrew's Community of Faith. Or you might have found it via our Facebook page or even this channel itself. No matter what brought you here, welcome. My husband John has graciously shared his YouTube channel, The Accessible Faith Project, with us during this time of pandemic as a place to share my weekly reflections. There are other videos on this channel which are an opportunity to learn more about the Bible, faith questions, and the like. If you'd like to receive notifications of when new videos are posted, you can do so by clicking on the little bell icon that says subscribe and signing up. It's completely free. Last week, I talked about the link between food and remembering. This week, I had music on my mind, in particular the spiritual Wade in the Water, which I'm using as the title for this reflection. It's the one that goes, and I'll explain why that particular song came to mind in connection with our reading from the book of Exodus in just a bit. But first, I want to invite you to picture the scene. All of the Hebrew slaves are gathered on the shore at the edge of the sea, and they're caught between certain death at the hands of Pharaoh's soldier or to be drowned amongst the dark waters of the sea. And Pharaoh had let them go after God had struck Egypt with great and terrible plagues and wonders, but it wasn't willingly. By the time the slaves had made their way towards the shores of the sea, Pharaoh had changed his mind. He would sooner see the slaves dead than free in another land. And caught between Pharaoh's murderous rage and the angry waters of the sea, the Hebrew slaves had no way out. They felt betrayed, and they turned to Moses in their desperation and accused him of leading them to their doom. "Why did you lead us here?" they cried. "Surely we had a better life back there, even if it meant we were merely slaves in Egypt. You've led us out here to die." And you know, they do have a point. By all accounts, Moses has led them to a dead end, trapped and with nowhere else to go. Now sure, there had been a sign of the pillar of cloud and fire that God had sent before and behind them, but these elements would not hold back a spear tip or a barbed arrow. The soldiers are going to drive the panicking refugees into the sea, to be swallowed up and drowned by the great and terrible deep. And if there was one thing that the Hebrews feared more than Pharaoh's army, it was the sea. They were a people who liked dry land and solid ground. They were a people who lived far away from the shorelines for the most part, leaving sailing and plying the waters to the Phoenicians or to the Egyptians. The water was a great and terrible place, a big, dark, swirling mass of chaos filled with all kinds of untold horrors. And going into the water was to suffer a fate worse than a soldier's blade. And Moses had literally led them to a dead end. Now, as Canadians, we don't tend to understand the sea in quite the same way, likely in part because oceans make up 3 of our borders. Our hymns and many of our cultures, and for some of us, our heritage, have made waters to be something to be enjoyed, respected, to be sure, but to be enjoyed. And speaking personally, I actually really like being on a boat. I've been on a couple of cruises. I love hearing and being in the surf while it pounds on the beach, and I've gotten to swim with the turtles while snorkeling. And for me, for the most part, the sea is a place of wonder and of pleasure. And yet, I know that that isn't the case for everyone. Recent days and years have given us a glimpse of the deep and terrible nature of the water and of the seas. The swirling waters of Hurricane Laura hit the Dominican Republic and then the state of Louisiana earlier this year. And many of us still remember Hurricane Katrina and, of course, the great Asiatic tsunami. These storms remind us of how terrible the waters of the deep can be. It is those images of horror and devastation, of churning, chaotic waters swallowing communities whole, that gives us a little bit of a glimpse into the kind of terror that the fleeing slaves faced when they came to the shores of the Red Sea. Now, one of the things that we don't catch in English about the name of this body of water is that in Hebrew, the original language of the Old Testament, Red Sea is actually probably better translated the Sea of Reeds, or even as the Sea of Ends. For coming up against the sea was, of course, the end of the road. Now, given the choice, going back to slavery or even to the soldiers' spears seemed like a whole lot more reasonable option to many of them. And it is here in the darkest of places, at this time of deep terror, that we can experience the greatest of God's wonders. At this time of greatest despair by the Hebrews, God tells Moses to hold out his staff and to point to the one place where the Israelites will not go. And God has Moses say to them, "Don't be overwhelmed by your fears. Stand firm in your belief in me. I'm with you. I will lead you through the waters to the land that I promised you." And the waves of the deep are driven back and divided. Through a dead end, through a place of certain death, emerges a path of dry land. And they stand at the shore, staring at this new path before them, a new way, just when it seemed that all was lost. The way to freedom, the way to leaving behind the things that had oppressed them and enslaved them, was to trust in God's promise, to know that God was with them, and to take a leap of faith. And in the words of the spiritual, wade in the water, to wade in the water that they were so afraid of. For it's only through the water that they can embark on a new beginning of freedom, no longer Hebrew slaves, but as the people of Israel. Now, wading in the water doesn't mean that things are going to be easy. In fact, the Israelites will face other challenges that we'll hear about in the coming weeks, such as a shortage of food, a lack of water, and of course, 40 years of wandering through the desert before they actually reach the land that God has promised them. And naturally, there will be complaints. There will be grumbling. There will be wishes to go back to Egypt. But by God's grace, they would be able to face those challenges and to journey on, stronger and more faith-filled. By taking those first steps of faith, by trusting that God was indeed with them and wading into the water, they are transformed to be the Exodus people, and most of all, to be God's people. Our challenge, of course, as people who live in the 21st century, is that we seem to kind of want the best of both worlds. We want to be in Egypt where things are known and familiar, and yet we also long for freedom and for new life. We want the lack of responsibility that is often associated with youth and the freedoms of adulthood. We want the bliss of being newly married with no one but each other and the joy of having family and children. This passage, for me, I think speaks to our own personal lives as we struggle with our past and as we wonder together in this interim time about our future as a community of faith. Not only that, it's about our communities as we wrestle with the same things. It's about this church community as we seek God's will for us in the days, in the weeks, and in the years to come. We might at times feel like the Israelites, trapped amidst the chaos of a dead end. We might feel frightened. We might wonder what the future holds and what is coming next. And as we stand on the edge of the water with our Israelite siblings, brothers and sisters in this story, we cannot go back the way we came. We cannot go back to our Egypt, whatever it may be. Instead, we are called to trust that God is with us, even when the way looks uncertain, and to wade in the water towards a new beginning. Wading in the water, of course, means we're going to get wet. Now, sure, the past and even slavery to things like money and power and relationships sometimes looks better and more comfortable. But any major life change, even one for which the people have hoped for and prayed for, takes effort, it takes hardship, and it takes disappointment. It also takes the willingness to change, and for most of all, to trust that God is with us in all things. And so, friends, let's wade in the water together. And like the Israelite people, we can be a transformed people. Thanks be to God. Amen.